interesting issue came to my attention when I was teaching a class on our contract addenda. We were discussing the seller's temporary leaseback. At one point, it was popular and seemed fair from both sides to require the seller to pay the buyer's PITI, or principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, as rent for the period of time the seller is occupying the property after closing. An issue arises, however, when the buyer decides to close on different loan terms than were specified in the contract, and the lease only requires PITI. As I've tried to make clear in previous videos, the financing term a buyer inserts into a contract does not obligate the buyer to those terms, but rather it is a contingency in favor of the buyer. A buyer can come to closing on whatever terms he decides, as long as the seller is getting his money and incurs no additional costs. The buyer can change how much he puts down by either increasing the amount put down or putting less down. The buyer can close on a better interest rate than what is specified in the contract, or he can close on a worse interest rate. All of that is up to the buyer. As long as the seller is getting his money and incurs no additional cost, the buyer can change their financing. In light of this, then, what is PITI that the seller has agreed to pay as a leaseback? If buyer borrows more money or incurs a higher interest rate, does that PITI, and thus the rent that the seller has agreed to pay, actually go up? If the buyer puts more cash down or decides to pay all cash, does the PITI go down such that the buyer gets little or close to no rent under the leaseback? There is no definitive answer to these questions. The only provision of the contract that potentially addresses this is paragraph 12B, which states, if any expense exceeds the amount expressly stated in this contract for such expense to be paid by a party, that party may terminate this contract unless the other party agrees to pay such excess. However, I'm not sure how the courts would interpret this paragraph when seller has agreed to pay PITI of buyer. Is that a literal interpretation, meaning whatever PITI the buyer has, that is what the seller will pay? Or is it implied that the rent will be the PITI that would have been paid if buyer had closed under the exact terms specified in the contract? My suggestion is to avoid this issue, insert an actual dollar amount. That figure can actually easily be calculated when drafting the contract using the financing contingency terms in the contract to calculate principal and interest, and then knowing what the taxes and insurance cost is on the property. Calculate that figure and insert an actual figure in the contract. As always, Allegiance Title wants to serve as your trusted resource for results. Please call on us to help you with all your title needs. Thank you.